Okay, welcome to Documenting Botanical Diversity, Part 4. So I spoke about using iNaturalist, and I spoke a lot about making herbarium specimens, and mentioned that I no longer bring a field notebook with me into the field. And that's because I've just found it's easier to just record data on my phone. So for this section, I'm going to try to go relatively slowly. So you're welcome to try to follow along with the materials that were provided in the folder download. Or I also included a PDF of slides, so you can go through it at your own pace. And of course, this video will be uploaded later, so you could revisit this and try to do it at your own pace. So first of all, just best practices when using iNaturalist or taking a photo is sometimes you can capture a lot of information about an organism with a single shot. So a lot of times I'll get, one in focus shot of a beetle, and there's not a lot more I can do with my cell phone to try to improve that observation. But with plants, a lot of times there's a lot of different things you might want to capture. So I usually try to get at least 4 or 5 different photos that capture different aspects of a plant. So try to get something like a flower or fruit shot, try to get a head-on shot. And this, as I mentioned, photographing Asteraceae, getting a photo of the involucre from the side is really critical for being able to identify things. Details of a leaf is really handy, or any sort of vegetative parts, the habit of the plant. So just seeing how it's shaped, how it's growing. And then I try to get a nice wide angle shot that will capture the habitat. So, and all of these would be included in the photos of a single observation. And again, the San Diego Natural History Museum has that really useful guide. And this is, John Redman, having gone through and identified over 600,000 observations, he's got a good sense for what he needs to see in a photo to be able to make that identification. So he's put together this really useful guide, so that with taxon specific considerations. So here is a basic herbarium label, as I usually collect one. So the name of your herbarium, the flora project. This is really useful for people who are filing specimens. I like to include the family, the name, the genus and the species of an organism, the taxonomic authority, and then I begin usually with the county. Sometimes herbaria are organized with county level distributions, and that's a useful unit. I try to give a detailed locality information in addition to having the coordinates and elevation. And so part of that is it's really easy to make a mistake with coordinates. You accidentally drag and drop in Excel and it changes all the numbers, or you forget the negative, the minus sign, and end up in the wrong hemisphere. So it's really good to have detailed written locality information in addition to the coordinates, because they're kind of like a cross check. You can see one and see the other, and hopefully they make sense and they correspond to the same place. Another thing too is once you have those coordinates, and if you're collecting it with your phone and automating it, there's less room for error. And then you can always go back later in Google Earth or Google Maps and be able to come up with more detail. You can kind of reconstruct this as long as you are really confident that your coordinates are accurate. I like to have a description of the habitat where a plant is growing, and then a list of associated species is always helpful. And then details about the population size, how many plants there are, if it's rare, if it's common, abundant, any details like that. And in the case of something like a flower, any detail that you think is going to be lost in that specimen that's not going to translate. So flower color is one of those things that often is lost. And floral scent not only is it lost on the herbarium specimen, you also can't capture that on iNaturalist. So details like that can be really helpful. And then the date. So all of these things in the blue circles, this is all information that is captured by iNaturalist when you make an observation. So it has some locality information. If you type in the identification yourself with or without some artificial intelligence assistance, the location at county level, usually some sort of a course, locality, coordinates, who you are, and the date. So all that information is automatically recorded, basically, when you make an observation. And then there are some other things that can be extrapolated later. So there's a useful online resource for taxonomic authorities, and also resources for getting elevational data based on GPS coordinates. That leaves some other information that you really want to record in the moment. And so that would be anything about the habitat that is not going to be captured, your list of associated species, how many plants there are, if it's abundant, and then any associated collectors. And then critically, you also want to make sure to include your collection number. So this is, one of the most important things to keep track of. So there was a paper that came out a few years ago that kind of described this method, and it's already is a little bit out of date in terms of reliance on what were called traditional projects in iNaturalist that have sort of been phased out and are a little bit clunky in terms of having to individually add observations to them. But it enabled you to create individual fields. So these are all fields that were created by the authors for a specific project. And then the rest of these are actually just the data as it is exported from iNaturalist. And then the corresponding, and you could think of each of these words as a column in a spreadsheet, either exported from iNaturalist or a Darwin core field, which is sort of an agreed upon format used by GBIF and a lot of other museum specimen biodiversity data organizations. So it is kind of annoying that I think every single field has a different name of some kind. And this is just, just the way it always seems to be, is that there's different names for different fields, but you can see they all kind of correspond. And this becomes important. The detail of, whether something is capitalized or not will be important when you're making your own template or using an existing template and making sure that they correspond. But the nice thing about these data is they are kind of universal, the way these data are collected, and they can be moved into lots of different formats. And this paper also has a method for putting a QR code onto your specimen, which is, it's not something that I've done, but that's kind of a nice trick. And then there is an Excel template and spreadsheet example on the University and Jepson Herbaria website, and this will allow you to kind of see what the data columns are called and how data are structured to go into CSpace, which is then used for our CCH data. And so this is the system that's used by the Jepson Herbarium. So I'm going to go over pulling your data off of iNaturalist, but it's very easy from there to then paste that or format that into the data structure needs of any herbarium. So now that you've made some observations and you want to go back and collect your data, this is what it would look like in your phone. So once you make an observation, you have this notes field. So I begin with my collection number and then have some associated information. And this is what that looks like going on your desktop. So I just want to make a point here. If you're using iNaturalist on your phone, that is great. It's really optimized for simple, streamlined use, especially for making observations. Has some other features for exploring things. And but once you get to your desktop and open iNaturalist in your browser, there is a lot more you can do with it. There's many more features. So I definitely encourage you to use iNaturalist both with your phone and your computer. They're great for different reasons. And so this is the field on your browser for editing an observation. And again, you have this notes field where you can, I enter all the information. I enter the name of the plant. The date is just imported from the metadata of the photo. This location is just pulled from the coordinates themselves. So here are the coordinates, the precisional accuracy. The photos are in here, and you could add sounds, but I usually don't add sounds for plants. So this is kind of my method. That paper I showed before creates all these separate fields into an iNaturalist project with the traditional project. The newer projects are much less computationally demanding, and they are query-based. So they are updated automatically, and things don't need to be added individually to a project. Project is defined and they're included. And so what that means, instead of having all these separate fields, these are columns in the spreadsheet that I would like to have. And so I just started adding some sort of a delimiter. So in this case, I just used a slash. You could really use anything. And so when I first have my collection number, I just add a slash, field notes, associated collectors, and locality. And this is another kind of useful thing with iNaturalist is I was sampling along this granite bald here. And so each one of these little green dots is a different observation. So sometimes your associated species you may not identify right away. You could have photos of all of the different plants that you saw in this habitat, and then you could revisit those in iNaturalist and help to populate your list of associated species. Especially if you're moving quickly in the field, you have limited time, you could photograph all of these things instead of trying to write down all the names, and then be able to revisit the identifications later. So that's really a helpful thing. So this is just adding these delimiters. And of course, if you didn't manage to get those all in the right place in the field later, you could go back. But the reason I'm doing this is separating these is that I can use the text to columns function in Excel to make different columns of data. So first thing I'll do is go up here to this filters section. This is from iNaturalist main page, your observation. So go to filters. And then once you do this, so in this case, I have just my observations. So you have my name, you could download someone else's observations. You could just say, oh, I'm only interested in plants or a certain taxonomic category. And then what I do if I'm making herbarium specimen labels often will be to choose the date range of my collecting trip and say, okay, I want to sort out all the specimens that I collected during this period of time, and then go to download. And so this will take you through some different sheets here. You have some different options. So it gives you this URL right here. So earlier I got a question about, well, how do I separate all the lichens that I collected from this one individual tree into a set of things on iNaturalist? And you could go into the map feature of Explore Data, draw a circle or a boundary around that tree, and then it will create this line of text in the URL that you can then use as a link to these dates. So if you want, you can just edit this line of text directly and it will change your query, which is kind of handy. Otherwise, you don't need to do anything. It's just there. And it just kind of shows you this query is represented by this line of text. So the first thing you want to do is you go through the preview and say, okay, this is 1170 observations. And if this is not the number you're expecting, and these are not the plants you thought you would see, you can kind of go back and say, okay, maybe I need to adjust this query. I need to subset this by geographic area. So that's the first thing. And then the next thing is to choose the columns. So this is where you're sort of designing your spreadsheet that will be exported. This is the default. All of these columns are checked. The easiest thing is to just go through the default, or if you want a much smaller spreadsheet, you can uncheck a lot of these boxes. And then these are some extra add-ons. So these taxon extras I like because I want to include the family name in my specimen label. The species name is already there, sort of under scientific name. But you can add these. If you have like a long list of taxa and you want to sort by order, you know, it's just, sometimes it's nice to be able to sort taxonomic diversity through using fields in Excel. And then these are just observation fields that are usually empty, but in case there's something there, you could download that too. And then you will go to create export. So here is the list of the query. Tells you what your options are going to be and what will appear in your Excel file. So go ahead and create export. This is the part that I'll skip, but you can expect to wait a little while or have an email delivered depending on the size of your query. So once your export is complete, just go ahead here, download. And then you're going to end up with this big, intimidating, text-rich Excel file. And the key thing here is if you go over to where it says notes, or it says notes when you're in iNaturalist, and that's what you're adding or editing. But when you go over here, it's going to actually be under description. So that is just one of those things that just kind of throws you, and it gets sort of hidden and buried in all of this text. And so if you go in here, you'll start to see whatever notes you took. So this is the column that I would then sort by, and you'll end up with all of your collection numbers will appear in numerical order if you included your collection numbers. So all of a sudden, everything that you collected or took notes on with your collection number will appear here in sequence. And then you can sort of delete all the rest and then just work with this subset of the data. So then once you have your data sort of cleaned out, you can go into Microsoft Excel and use this text to columns feature. And you have delimited data. So here's a look at your data. So it has the collection number here with, I use the slash as the delimiter, and then all of this data. So you could have just one delimiter. Sometimes that's how I organize things. The main thing is that you just want to have consistent results in Excel when you go to text to columns. And so here you can say your delimiter is other, and it is this symbol that you've decided. So you can see here that this is now going to separate my collection number from all the other data that I collected together in that one box within iNaturalist. And then this will then place all these things out into your spreadsheet, and you'll just have to name the columns. So I provided an Excel sheet that has the columns named according to how they will appear in the Microsoft Mail Merge Word document. And so making sure those things match, it will be critical to making the mail merge work. But that's what that looks like. And so this is just that section of the spreadsheet that has collection number, field notes. So these are all the different the columns as I have named them and called them. And so, you know, you either can do this using delimiters, or you can just type this information in. I'll get to how the elevation data was placed within there. And so you can kind of go through and format the cells to make your herbarium label look the way you want it to look. So I use this observed on, which will have the date. And you can format, that's the format the cells according to date, and then the type. I like this United Kingdom Gregorian calendar. You put the month in the middle with the day of the month followed by the year. That's the format I like. You have different options with different abbreviations, but I like this one. And then this is something I mentioned before, for pulling out the taxonomic authority on the name. So that's not something that you will get from iNaturalist, but it is something that I think is a good idea to include on an herbarium specimen label. Because some names have more than one taxonomic authority, and those different names have different type specimens and different taxonomic concepts. So this is just sort of a way to avoid confusion. And so this taxonomic or scientific names to check, you can paste up to 5,000 names. So you can just go from your Excel sheet and paste them into this. This is the website, tnrs.bndata.org. And then perform name resolution. You can use Tropicos, World Flora Online, USDA. These are all different name databases that are similar, slightly different. And then it will just output a spreadsheet and check all of your names. And this is also a good way to check spelling errors in your scientific names. If they're not from iNaturalist, but that you've typed them up and you want to just do a quick spell check, that's really handy. It'll also give you the family classification according to Tropicos or according to one of these systems. So this is not just for the iNaturalist data. This is just a useful tool for any list of scientific names. So you can pull out those scientific names there and add them to your spreadsheet. Unfortunately, the data structure is not maintained. So if you have Aspedotus densa in there 3 or 4 times, it's only going to appear once in the resolution, and then you'll have to kind of you'll have to work with the data a little bit to make them match to paste them back in. But it's pretty straightforward. And then this is another tool. If you have say a point on a map, you can pull the geographic coordinates out of a single point pretty easily. And then there's also this bulk point query service, which is offered by USGS, the national map. So again, this is a system where you can drop things in, but you have to format the data in a very specific way, and it has to be in the form of a text file. So you can't go directly from a spreadsheet. And it has to be longitude first, and then latitude. So you have to reverse your latitude and longitude and separate them by a comma and not a space. So kind of a finicky, but luckily, as long as you have your latitude and longitude in separate places in Excel, that's not too hard to do. You can just enter this formula, the equals symbol with this cell, then quotes, comma, quotes, and that cell, and then paste and drop down. And then once you paste that into some sort of a text editor like BB Edit, you can just save it as a text file .txt and upload it to that website, and you'll be able to get elevation for everything, which you can then import. So that's kind of a handy way to do that in bulk. And now onto the mail merge portion. So if you open this iNat label template, is the name of this document, you'll see, so you have a name of an herbarium, you have the flora, and you may have the state here, taxon family name, in all these details. So each of these symbols here means this is inserting a column from the Excel sheet. And so the formatting here, so you have italicized species name, and then a non-italicized taxon authority, the boldface for the county, all those sort of details are done in the template. And then you can go ahead to start mail merge from a directory. You want to use an existing list, and that will be the iNat specimen label demo list that was provided. And then this is, once you first enter it, you go to preview results. And so this should be your label. So this is all pulled directly out of that spreadsheet. And you can see there's some issues like the scientific names and the associated species list are not in italics. So you go through and with this finish and merge. So this is the preview results button, followed by the finish and merge. And you can go through and edit individual documents. So you can kind of adjust the spacing here. italicize all the scientific names. Just make it look the way you want it to look and be spaced on the page. I like to go through and sort of justify the top of the label, so I can get usually 4, sometimes 6, depending on your labels, out of every page. You make sure you want to have narrow margins on your page in 2 columns. And then you can kind of get this all ready, and you want it to be printed on cotton rag or archival paper and lined up so you can just go through with a paper cutter easily. And then you can also customize these however you want. So I just provided an example. There's another example of a slightly different style on the Jepson website you can use, and then you can go through this insert merge field. So you can customize your template and make it anything you want. It just has to match the columns in a spreadsheet. So in this case, these are all the columns that were created. All the other columns came, like this taxon, species name. Some of this stuff all came from iNaturalist directly. This observed on was the date downloaded directly from iNaturalist in that format. And then these other things were added later. So, so that template is just sort of a mix of columns I created and columns from iNaturalist. So I know that was a lot and I went fairly quickly. So we do have a PDF for you to look through and revisit those slides right now if you would like to, in addition to the templates, but I'm happy to take any questions.